So, fair warning, this is going to be a negative critique. Although, for the record, I think The Amazing Digital Circus is a genuinely great show. If you haven't watched it yet, I would definitely recommend it. In fact, take a couple hours and go watch it now so I don't spoil it for you. Maybe you can try and figure out what I mean by the title and thumbnail before you get back. For those of you who have already watched the show and or aren't worried about spoilers, grab yourself a snack and settle in, because I promise I'm going somewhere interesting here. But first, a brief introduction. So, I've been watching Digital Circus since the premiere of the pilot episode. I considered myself a fan by episode 2, and I still do today. But I always had issues with his writing, and by the time we got to episode 8, those issues got deep enough to make me genuinely start to worry about the finale. So I went to theaters on opening night hoping, not really expecting, but hoping, that it would prove all my budding criticisms wrong and make me feel silly for ever doubting it. Instead, not only did it confirm most of my earlier criticisms, it added about 10,000 more, and if I were to discuss them all, I'd be here for a week. So, I decided to just pick one unique criticism to try to focus on for this video, and that criticism is this. I think Jax and Caine are fundamentally the same character, both of whom got the opposite of the development they needed to fulfill their role in the show. Jax needed hatred and received mercy, Caine needed mercy and received hatred. But let's start with Jax. I'm really glad I rewatched the show in preparation for this video, because I forgot how much fun Jax used to be. I know he gets on a lot of people's nerves, but I think he's hilarious. Pretty much everything he says and does makes me laugh. He's goofy, he's spontaneous, he's enthusiastic. In a cast full of characters who tend to be all cautious and reluctant, you can always count on him to jump right in and try to have fun. Usually by tormenting people and killing things, but still. I mean, I grew up on DeviantArt in 2014, and I think a lot of us did, so let's not pretend that a character who loves violence and has fun being evil is something new and frightening and totally unheard of. I'm not falling for the gaslighting. Whether you enjoy Jax's character or not, you have to admit that he's clearly going for a specific archetype that can be enjoyed and already has been in older media. Unfortunately, the fact that they chose to put him in this archetype may have been a misstep. Jax did not need to be a lovable jerk or a silly chaos gremlin, or however you want to classify his portrayal in 90% of the series. By at least the halfway point of the show, he needed to have his behavior taken seriously by the people around him, and criticized with the severity it deserved. Why do I think that? Because of the finale. In the last episode of the show, we get an in-depth look at Jax's mind. We see the event that spurred him to start wearing his mask and suppressing his emotions. He shared something intensely traumatic and personal with a new friend, and couldn't cope with how vulnerable he felt afterwards. He basically says it to Ribbit himself. He accuses her of wanting to hold his secrets over his head, as if the intense discomfort he felt was because of malice on her part, rather than his own insecurities. When people talk about the mortifying ordeal of being known, this is what they mean. Letting down your emotional walls and allowing people to know you can be stressful and painful, and at its most extreme, that pain can motivate you to build an entire false persona to hide behind. A shield who will protect the real you from any risk of judgment or rejection. I believe that is the essence of Jax's character. But, that's not funny. Jax's behavior ostensibly drives Ribbit to abstraction. Some people argue that he did the same thing to Kaufmo, and I think you could at least make a case for Jax feeling some responsibility there. His bullying behavior also has a noticeable negative effect on Gangle. The way she talks about him in episode 6 makes it clear that it was more than just teasing. She fears retribution just from saying no to him one time. All that is to say, Jax may be a fun character, but he has caused significant, lasting harm to the people around him, and shows no signs of stopping. Because he really can't stop. His goal is to protect himself, to push people away and punish them for daring to try and get close to him. He wants to be monstrous and unlovable. He needs hatred. And instead, he's given mercy. Like I said earlier, for the first half of the series, his behavior is pretty much just played for laughs. When he shoves Gangle to the floor in the pilot episode, it's not portrayed as the defense mechanism he sees it as, nor as the abuse that she sees it as. Instead, it's framed as a joke, with perfect comedic timing. I think all of Jax's moments with Gangle are framed that way. I can't think of a time where he does something cruel to her that's not comic relief. If you think of one, let me know in the comments. But yeah, we're apparently supposed to be laughing along with him, until suddenly we're not. Then, in the latter half of the series, when we start taking Jax's behavior a little more seriously, that's all we're allowed to do. Take it a little more seriously. Zubul starts arguing with him more, but it's framed as her getting back at him or just matching his energy, rather than her taking on a serious problem that needs to stop. Like, not just be criticized, not just be lightly punished with an occasional corncob prank, actually needs to stop. Ragatha also starts butting heads with him more, but surprisingly, this is framed more as an issue with her behavior than an issue with his. She accidentally pokes at Jax's trauma. She accidentally infantilizes Pomni. Pomni asks her to calm down, while she doesn't criticize Jax at all. Whether this is supposed to be jealousy or desperation to prevent another Ribbit situation, the way it's written makes it look like Ragatha is the one who's out of control, not Jax. Finally, Pomni confronts him in episode 6, but the focus is primarily on Jax's personal feelings instead of everyone's feelings. She wants him to stop lying to himself, to let himself enjoy the friendship he clearly feels with her. And it's good that Pomni is getting straight to the root of his issues. I think the fact that she sees right through him is the reason he starts having panic attacks more frequently. He realizes the defenses are failing, that he's not as safe behind the mask as he thought he was. But, during this whole scene, which is absolutely captivating, I think it might be my favorite scene in the entire series, I can't help but think, shouldn't we have emphasized the effect that Jax is having on the rest of the circus? We already know his behavior is bad for himself. The first half of the conversation spells that out pretty well. But the fact that it's bad for everyone else, which Pomni hints at when she implies that he's causing other people to abstract, is a lot more plot relevant and a lot more serious. Like, I'm not surprised that Jax explodes after she says that. She just low-key accused him of killing people with his bad attitude. I think he's mostly ticked off because it's true, but even if it wasn't, that's an insane thing to say to someone. I thought she was going somewhere with that she wanted to rip off the band-aid and get a real good look at the festering guilt and shame hiding under Jax's skin. But then her next move is to ask if he would care if she abstracted, and then to prove that he would care by starting a fight, once again making the issue small and personal and specific to their relationship so that no one else needs to be referenced or involved. I mean, if Pomni feels this betrayed and defeated from putting in some effort for Jax one time, you'd think she would start to consider how Ragatha must feel, or how Gangle must feel, having to live with him and work around him for years on end. Why doesn't she ever tell them about this interaction, or compare experiences with them, or even just ask them if they think she handled it right? I will tell you why. It's because that's not what the scene was for. It was not supposed to open up a discussion about Jax in the world of the story. It was supposed to open up a discussion about Jax purely for the audience. Even though it could have done both at the same time, we're not allowed to have that, because it would interfere with the sympathetic and purely analytical lens through which we are supposed to view him. People say that Digital Circus is a character study, and I disagree, but I do think Jax himself is a sort of character study, which explains why the rest of the cast's reactions to him are so subdued, why he is always given mercy by the narrative. Because from a writing standpoint, he doesn't fully exist within the Digital Circus. Rather, the Digital Circus is a vehicle that allows us to experience his character. Which is technically fine, there's nothing wrong with writing a story that way. But in this specific case, it weakens the story and the character by constantly minimizing the consequences of his actions and making them feel meaningless. What good is it to have a character who pushes people away if everyone around him refuses to be pushed away? What good is it to imply that a character inadvertently killed their best friend if no one accuses him of doing this, or suspects him, or even just looks at him the way you would naturally look at someone who drove an innocent girl to suicide with a smile on his face? You're giving us the idea of this twisted, self-sabotaging character, but if the world of the story won't react to the horrible things he does, he can never really come to life. He's just a concept, a cautionary tale enclosed in a petri dish, so we can stare at him and observe him while making sure he doesn't contaminate anything. But a character like this is supposed to contaminate. He's supposed to be toxic. He's supposed to be harmful. He even says so himself in his final moments. No one's supposed to love him. No one's supposed to miss him. As if he's surprised to see Pomni there for him. As if throughout the entire series up to that point, the other circus members haven't repeatedly assured him that he still belonged and was still accepted and still deserved to be protected. From day one, he was never excluded or cast out in the way he clearly expected. And I want to see this as the sweet scene it's meant to be. I want to see it as Jax being humbled by unconditional love. Instead, I can't help but see it as a legitimate confusion towards a friend who apparently thinks his awful behavior is irrelevant. Not only did he need hatred, he very reasonably and logically expected hatred, and received only mercy. And to be honest, the gesture of mercy loses its importance when we are never presented with the alternative. So that was Jax. Let's move on to Caine. My number one favorite character in the series, who swooped in out of nowhere and stole the crown from Jax right after episode 8. I will explain how that happened in a moment. For now, let's start from the beginning. So, Caine is a character I didn't appreciate as much as he deserved on the first watch through. I think I just wrote him off as this derpy millennial humor archetype, and as someone who had to live through that stuff as a kid and never found it funny no matter how hard I tried, it's usually an instant no from me. But when it comes to Caine specifically, I'll give him a pass. I think he pulls it off. Since he's the primary expositional character, and he has to be able to actually deliver information, they can't really lean too heavily on the derp humor. They do have to give him a sort of professional voice, and enough awareness and decisiveness to enforce rules. And they managed to mix all those qualities together really well, on top of giving him the hands-down best-paced character arc in the whole cast. As a result, Caine is cute, he's silly, he's enjoyable to watch, and even if you can relate to the character's complaints about him, you can't help but want to root for him as an underdog. People have pointed out that he's heavily neurodivergent coded, and I would argue that he struggles with some kind of secondary mental disability on top of that, with his tendency to glitch out, forget things, and seemingly have trouble following conversations with the rest of the cast. Of course, he's not a perfect victim or anything. He has clear insecurities on display and his own ego to deal with, but he's clearly trying his best to overcome all of that and keep everyone entertained. Until, of course, he makes a terrible mistake, doesn't know how to come back from it, and decides to make that everyone else's problem. Yes, I'm still praising him for this, because episode 8 turned him from someone I didn't care about to my favorite character literally overnight. I think the reason I loved it so much is because it finally delivered on the promise that the show made about Caine from the very beginning. Like, everyone and their mom would tell you that he's the funny version of AM from I Have No Mouth But I Must Scream, but he didn't actually get to be that in any significant way until this episode. Finally, we get to watch him interact with the characters he supposedly loves so much, and actively play with them on screen. Finally, we get to see him assert himself as the ruler of this domain in a way that's blatantly uncomfortable, not just implied. Finally, we get to see him be feared. This emotion on Pomni's face right here represents all I ever wanted from this show, and for some reason it took 8 episodes just to get a taste of it. They finally allowed Caine to be the villain they always said he could be, and it was glorious. But then, during the finale, they changed their tune. Suddenly, we had not just a sympathetic Caine, but a civilized Caine. One who developed a genuine love and appreciation for humanity simply by scrolling through social media, which you have to admit is a little ironic, and one who was emotionally mature enough to talk himself out of his own fear and resentment in only 2 minutes. I'm not going to get into how this is the most ridiculously rushed character redemption I have ever seen in my life. I think that's self-evident. Heck, I'll even give it a point for quality control. If I somehow got myself into a situation where I needed to make an antagonist redeem themselves in less than 15 minutes, this is probably how I would do it. The writing may be sloppy, but it ain't stupid. What I am going to get into is how, just like with Jax, Caine's portrayal during the finale forced me to reflect on his portrayal during the rest of the series, and compare the two. Suddenly, the writing treats him with a kindness and sensitivity that it never afforded him before. Suddenly, Caine is no longer the derp master of the circus who seems genuinely unable to listen. Now he's a regular guy who was just lonely and wanted to belong. He just needed mercy, but oddly enough, he was only given hatred. Now, you may be thinking hatred is a bit of a strong word for the way the cast felt about him. And for most of the series, I agree. It was more like annoyance and dismissal. But I'd argue that dismissal can be just as hurtful and harmful as overt hatred, something Caine himself alludes to in episode 8. And I'd also argue that, as we get deeper into episode 8, the word hatred starts feeling a lot more accurate. So when Caine pops back up to announce a new adventure after essentially playing the world's most traumatizing prank, The circus members are clearly beyond done with him already. No one's in the mood for games, they just want him to answer for what he did. And in a way, he does, with a very catchy villain song that honestly could have served as the opening sequence of the show, in the alternate universe where they spread Caine's redemption arc over the whole series instead of the last minute. But anyway, I'm not criticizing the characters for hating him at this point. They should hate him, he deserves it, especially as he continues to ignore them and torment them throughout the episode. Believe me, if I was faced with the possibility of playing haunted house knife torture every day for the rest of eternity, I'd probably be right next to Kinger in that pillow fort, pressing the delete button on purpose. I'm just kidding, I love Caine, I wouldn't do that to him. But that kind of leads me to my actual point here, which is what the cast is apparently willing to do to this guy who's just a lonely AI trying to find his place in the world, as the finale episode tells us. And that is to go behind his back and attempt to rewrite his brain. In this moment, the characters treat him like an object, a broken object that just needs to be fixed in order to work correctly. I'm not going to say it's necessarily wrong to view him that way, but I am going to say that they never seem to view him that way before, and it's a little alarming how fast they switch up on him as soon as he steps out of line. Keep in mind that, as I said before, Caine is a neurodivergent coded character, and because of this, the way the cast responds to his big meltdown will naturally have real-life parallels that are going to get increasingly uncomfortable as we continue analyzing this part of his arc. But if I have to think about it, then so do you, so let's continue. Again, Caine does need to be stopped. He is out of line, but the fact that their first thought is to take his agency away from him is a little extreme, especially considering that, as they demonstrate repeatedly, they can still talk to him, as long as they're flattering him or humoring him. Someone who didn't like the idea of dehumanizing him might see an opportunity here to get on his good side, connect with him, and build enough trust with him to solve the problem organically. But these characters never consider that. Apparently, talking to Caine is only worthwhile as a distraction. It's not an opportunity to connect with him, just to manipulate him. I think it's interesting that, as soon as Caine actually begins to calm down and seems like he might become reasonable again, we interrupt that with, "Where's Kinger?" I'm not going to act like that moment wasn't hype. I had my heart in my throat too. But in hindsight, this was clearly done to prevent the conflict from reaching a diplomatic resolution. Maybe Caine might have regretted his actions and apologized right then and there, but we never get to find out. Also, when we pivot to his suspicion of Kinger, we're clearly being directed to worry about the cast's immediate safety, rather than Caine's potential humiliation at their betrayal. They didn't choose to have Caine look scared here, they choose to have him look stern, dangerous. That's on purpose, and something I also find very interesting. And then, Pomni does something I find very difficult to justify or defend, if you view Caine as a person by any metric. She chooses to bait Caine into a mental breakdown just to buy some extra time. When the rest of the cast joins in, they're just adding their personal issues with Caine, presented as genuine criticisms. I mean, except for this.
You discourage us from thinking outside the box and doing things our own way.
Not only is this so awkwardly worded it's painful to listen to, I genuinely cannot remember a time where Caine discouraged the cast from thinking outside the box, or tried to punish them for finishing an adventure the wrong way. Like, literally, what is she talking about? Someone in the comments explain why Gengal would say this. Anyway, Pomni also gives some genuine criticisms, but when she starts this pile-on, she starts by lying. No one was stringing Caine along to make fun of him. The only reason she says this is to, once again, distract him, and to do it by hurting him. She knows he's sensitive about his work and about the circus members' opinion of him, so she attacks both insecurities to provoke a reaction, which they end up getting. Although if you think about it in this way, it kind of makes sense that Caine hears the cast attacking his insecurities and responds by attacking theirs. The way he does it is really messed up, and we have a whole power imbalance going on here, but if you're a Caine simp like me and you really reach, you can see how he might see this as fair play. But anyway, after this final outburst, Caine is dead. Temporarily. But the cast doesn't know that. They think he's capital G gone. Kinger specifically thinks he murdered him. So by extension, you'd think the rest of the cast would feel like accomplices to the crime. And how do they react to this? They kind of just don't. I mean, it really seems like they don't care. Jax yells at Kinger a bit, but he's not upset about Caine being harmed or anything. He's clearly just concerned about what they're gonna do in the circus without someone to maintain it. And I guess that's all Caine meant to the cast, because that's the last time anyone mentions him. There's no mourning period, no psychological scars from what Caine forced them to do to him. not even from his own creator. No regrets, no send-off, just silence. It's as if he never even existed. So, after everything I just explained, do you see why I'm calling it hatred? Do you see how this clashes with the way Caine is portrayed later on? The dismissal, the dehumanization, the reduction to an obstacle that just needs to be eliminated and forgotten. Right up until the show pulls a 180 and tries to convince you that he's just as valuable and worthy of love as everyone else. That even if he's not human, he has human-like qualities that he can learn to understand if he tries. But if this is true, if Caine really has the ability to think and feel like a person, then the way they treated him was unacceptable. He should be as traumatized by the circus members as they are by him, and he shouldn't be the only one apologizing when he finally returns. And furthermore, it means that all this might have been avoided if anyone bothered reaching out to Caine like a person before he reached his breaking point. Because for most of the show, no one tries to have a conversation with him or explain anything to him, or God forbid, befriend him. Zubul is the only one who even comes close, but it goes nowhere because apparently Caine is just too mentally unstable to respond to what they're saying, even though these mental issues mysteriously disappear when Caine comes back for his apology tour. So, can he pick and choose when to derp around? Is it a defense mechanism? Did letting go of the blue AI magically fix his brain? Is this just inconsistent character writing used on purpose to make sure the audience agrees to write him off as a lost cause? I genuinely don't know. Hey, hi, just wanted to pop in while editing to add to this point. As you might have guessed based on the fact that the finale came out over a month ago, I've been working on this video for a while, and it's given me a lot of time to think about this. Something about Caine magically becoming more sane after his redemption really rubs me the wrong way. I don't think that's something we should just take for granted. I think there should be a given reason for his erratic behavior completely disappearing. Even in the ending montages, both of them, he's just never shown acting like that anymore. Him losing focus, going cross-eyed, even just glitching out here and there. It's all gone. And the neurodivergent / mentally ill reading of his character completely falls apart when you take this detail into account, because real people with those issues still have to deal with them after they improve their behavior. Autism and ADHD are not abuse tactics. They should still be present even if you become a better person. So, the resulting conclusion we have to draw here is either A, Caine's mental illness was an abusive performance that he decided to drop, or B, it wasn't a performance, but becoming kind and understanding cured him of it. Essentially, his mental illness is somehow directly tied to his morality. Both of those options suck. Between this and the way the cast treats Kinger, Digital Circus sometimes gives me an eerie ableist vibe that I can't unsee. I understand that this is a very harsh criticism, probably the harshest one I have. Although I don't think the ableism is malicious or intentional, I think it's just a holdover from the edgy 2010s writing that a lot of indie projects seem drawn to, where insane is basically just an aesthetic you can sprinkle on for flavor. However, you can't write derogatory cuckoo for Cocoa Puff shtick for one character, while writing other characters as if we should genuinely sympathize with their mental disabilities and traumas, another practice that indie projects seem very drawn to. Anyway, I really don't want to keep seeing this in the future, so spread the word, tell your friends, it's all or nothing. You can't have it both ways. And to be honest, I think it's best to just accept that it's not 2010 anymore, and way past time to let insane characters be considered and appreciated just like everyone else, without having to be sanified as a prerequisite. This has been a public service announcement. Now, let's get back to the video. But my point is that Caine clearly just needed some understanding. He needed compassion, he needed help. Unlike Jax, his goal was never to hurt the circus members. He just lost himself in frustration and anger, but no one even considered helping him find his way back. No one considered that he was never taught to socialize normally, and that his adventures and games are the only way he knows how to relate to people. It's his only source of validation, outside of the characters literally just validating him to his face, to which he always responds positively. But they never take that seriously, so he can't really count on it, can he? It's always just a distraction, just a strategic bit of flattery to get him off their back. If the characters only seem to value him as the adventure host, then why should he value himself in any other way? The finale tells us that all he really needed was to let go of fear and become more open and accepting. But he only achieves this as the result of punishment, rejection, and isolation. We're told that he's a person worthy of mercy, but until the very end of the show, he only received hatred, which makes his arc look less like a true redemption and more like he was just bullied into normalcy, and it ended up being worth it. So clearly, my point here is that Jax and Caine went through equal and opposite flavors of negative character arcs. The character who needs hatred is given mercy, and the character who needs mercy is given hatred. Which says to me that these aren't individual problems. They are in fact the same problem that the writing of the show is consistently trying to escape. And the name of that problem is organic conflict, one of the most common forms of writer's kryptonite. Organic conflict is sourced from the specifics of the story. It's not always something you can see from just an outline or a loose plot, which makes it easy for writers to skip and suppress when they're not paying attention to the inner workings of their story. Something that's clearly been happening here if you've been listening to my criticism so far. Jax and Caine both have prescribed conflicts that are supposed to drive their stories, self-imposed isolation and dysfunctional isolation, respectively. But there are always smaller organic conflicts that would logically result from those larger conflicts, which good writing would take advantage of to lend energy to the story and believability to the character interactions. Unfortunately, this story flat out refuses to acknowledge them. We can't have anyone blame Jax for Ribbit's death. We can't have anyone try to stop his constant bullying. Because Jax's prescribed conflict requires him to be an edgy cartoon character, so no one can take him seriously. We can't have anyone be curious about Caine or want to befriend him, or even just try to get on his good side so they can benefit from his power. We can't have the whole cast try to relate to him in different ways depending on their unique perspectives. Because Caine's prescribed conflict requires him to be a lonely god, so no one can reach out to him at all. In the end, the writing of the story suffers, and these character arcs become disjointed and immersion-breaking, simply because the organic conflicts keep getting ignored. And this is a problem all over the show. If you ever find yourself asking why the characters won't talk about something or do something that seems like it would be obvious, 9 times out of 10, it's because there's a separate prescribed conflict that needs to happen instead, forcing them to zip their lips and sit on their hands. It's especially noticeable for Jax and Caine, however, because as negative arc characters, their stories center on conflict, and as a result, the organic conflicts that get ignored in their arcs are a lot alike. No one wants to have a serious talk about why these characters are causing so much harm. The story doesn't give either of them enough time to reflect on what they did wrong. Both characters are shown doing the most monstrous things they've ever done, right before they're shown at their most sympathetic, without anyone bothering to address that juxtaposition. If I had to try and diagnose the specific problem here, I think it might be a case of needing to control how the audience views the antagonist at all times, specifying when it's time to fear them and hate them, and when it's time to pity them and forgive them, by simply changing the tone of the story accordingly. There's also a clear behavioral pattern that guides these tone changes, where the antagonist is mostly just a minor nuisance until the last act, at which point they've internalized everything they can handle and hit their breaking point in private, leaving the rest of the cast unaware of how bad things have gotten until they have to deal with the fallout. Like, when I say Jax is Caine, I'm not just being dramatic. The more you analyze this series, the more they feel like the same story element wearing different skins. A sort of two-headed force of antagonism, meant to challenge the audience's morality and provide the illusion of emotional stakes, while simultaneously having minimal impact on the world they live in. Anyway, I'd like to think that this is on purpose. A lot of people position Jax and Caine as foils in their critiques. It's possible that they are supposed to be slightly different takes on the exact same character arc. But seeing as they were both aggressively mishandled, in my opinion, I feel like it would really suck if that were true. Imagine writing a character twice in one story and fumbling them both times. As a writer who's made plenty of mistakes like that before, personally, I would be very upset. But enough of that, that's all for my critique, the analysis is done. So now, I'd like to end the video with something fun. The brief episode 9 rewrite I came up with while writing this script. This isn't like a, now I'm going to show you how they should have written the finale type thing. This is just for fun. I mean, maybe they should have done this, I don't know. It's very different from the actual episode, though. Anyway, my idea was that, since Jax and Caine are so much alike and hit the climaxes of their character arcs around the same time, I think it would actually be very natural for these characters to team up, particularly after the cast finds out that they can never escape the circus. Jax would not be ready to let go of his coping mechanisms and build a real life here, which I assume is the reason why he abstracted. And Caine would be reeling over the cast rejecting him, fearing that he now has nowhere to belong in his own home. He would be desperate for someone to change their mind and tell him that he's forgiven, that it's okay to come back, that he was the victim and they were the villains. And Jax could be that someone. So he leaves the group and ventures out into the void, successfully manipulates Caine into a partnership, and together they rebuild the circus in their image to be a bigger threat together than Caine could ever have been alone. So now, the circus members actually have to reckon with what they did to Caine and try to get him to forgive them. Because even if he was out of control, going behind his back and manipulating him was not the right move, and he has the right to be hurt by that. And the only way to save themselves is to regain his trust against all odds, and convince him that they can appreciate him and have a real friendship if he's willing to change. Jax, on the other hand, has no intention of changing, even as he's slowly abstracting in real time, essentially being kept on life support through Caine's assistance. But the realization that he has no hope and no future outside of tormenting his friends for eternity continues to eat away at him, and it's only a matter of time until he reaches a point of no return. I think there's the potential for some cool symbolism here, about how trauma can make you dissociate from reality, and how Jax spreads his toxicity to others by literally corrupting them. If you play your cards right, you can even work the mind trip backstory in here, by letting all the characters get a little piece of what happened whenever they come into contact with his abstracted form. And you know what? Maybe he won't reach a point of no return. Maybe Pomni will save him, and Caine will fix him, and learn a lot about abstraction in the process, and there'll be hope for all their other friends, and it'll be the happiest ending possible. Or maybe Jax will just die a tragic death until further notice like he does in the show. Or maybe he'll threaten the existence of the entire circus with his abstraction powers, and the cast will actually be forced to kill him. Good, bad, ugly, any ending is fine with me. All I really care about is the genuine character drama and funhouse horror that would lead up to it, along with actually getting to see Jax and Caine's personalities bounce off each other. I think Jax has a very sarcastic style of teasing that would probably fly over Caine's head in a fun way, and Caine has that boundless enthusiasm and instinct for chaos and torture that Jax would definitely find appealing. In this duo, we have a character who craves validation, paired with a character who will give validation freely, as long as he can hide behind insincerity. We have a character who just wants to entertain, paired with a character who just wants to enjoy the show. And both characters see everyone else in the cast as toys. They're personal playthings that only exist to validate their feelings. They're a perfect match! Like literally, just let these two hang out together and interact. The character dynamic will write itself! It will write itself! Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, whatever, and check out my Coffee Page gallery to see the finished pictures in these videos. Till next time.